Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be discussing the tragedy of Medea, right, that you have all read. So let us get started. Medea, right, the character of Medea is one that was known to the ancient Greek world, right? Euripides didn't make up the character, right? Um, and so, who was kind of Medea in classical ancient Greek literature? So I have here these two um, uh, artists' representations in, like, I think the 17th century or 18th century of essentially the climax of the play, right? Where Medea, you can see her, well, on the left and the right, she's in this chariot. You can see in both situations, right, her dead children on the ground, and Jason about to draw his sword, but alas, it will be too late. So when we think about Medea, right, she is inextricably linked with Jason, right? And one of the two most famous kind of epic voyages in ancient Greek mythology, right? One of them being Odysseus, the Odyssey, the other one being Jason and the crew of the Argo, right? That his boat, Jason and the Argonauts. So this is, again, this is classical mythology, right? And so we have no evidence that this actually literally happened, right, in history. But using clues from the Argonautica, which is the book, essentially this group of epic poems that chronicles the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. Some scholars have put together where they think it may have been, right, in the world. And so this is one example. They do know, and again, this is myth, right? But he started off in Iolcus, which is oops, sorry, which is in kind of on the northern Aegean Sea, right? You can kind of see it here in the middle, above the red arrow, not to where it's pointing, but above that, going across the Aegean Sea, right? Which is what separates Greece from essentially modern day Turkey, right? Going east through the Aegean Sea, up through the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, which are two straits that link up the Aegean Sea with the Black Sea, right? And then along the Black Sea and way over here, the easternmost point that they get where the other arrow is Colchis. Now, Jason goes there to go retrieve the Golden Fleece, right? From a ram. Now, where he meets Medea in Colchis, and Medea is a princess essentially. Her dad, King Aeetes, is the king of Colchis, and her grandfather is Helios, the sun god, which will become relevant later in the play, and like her, the god of the sun, her aunt is Circe, who is a goddess of kind of herbs and potions, that kind of thing. And Medea is known in classical mythology as kind of an enchantress, right? She makes potions. We would maybe consider her in modern day something like of a witch figure, right? Um, and so she does have a kind of herbal, alchemical, magical kind of lineage, I guess you would say. So while in Colchis, what happens in order to get the fleece, right? Jason has a whole bunch of these trials that he has to go through, right? That King Aeetes makes him go through to get this fleece. But Medea says to Jason, "I will help you, right? If you will take me with you, right?" And Jason's like, "Sure, that's fine." And so Medea does a lot of things, essentially betraying her own family, right? She uh, there's one of the trials, the last one. There's this big, huge sleeping, essentially a dragon, right? That's guarding the golden ram, right? That has the fleece on it, and this dragon never sleeps. But Medea brews this concoction, essentially it's like narcotics, to put this dragon to sleep so that Jason can get the fleece. And of course, Medea's family is really, really upset about this, right? And so she's fleeing with Jason, and she ends up in some accounts of this killing her brother. Some of them she doesn't, um, but her brother is Absyrtus, what I like, it gives you a little bit of one of the things that's interesting about Medea is there's this etching, right, that was done, I think, in the 15th century of here on the right side, there is Medea, the largest figure, right, with the knife. And her brother is who she is holding off of the side of the boat, right? You see him dismembered, right? There's an arm and a leg and another leg, right? That's her brother. Goodness gracious, I don't know why he keeps doing that. That's her brother. Over there on the left side, that's King Aeetes. Um, and there's Jason over with Medea on the boat, kind of looking on like, whoa, that's kind of messed up. And so she's the kind of person who would kill and dismember her own brother to essentially make it impossible for her father to chase her, right? To distract him. He has to gather all of these remains in order to give Absyrtus a proper burial, right? So she is burning bridges. As it were. You don't go back home doing this. And so there's this huge long journey, right? They go, through what is today the Balkans, um, down the Adriatic, way over across Italy, down to North Africa, right, to Crete and everything. Now, where they end up is in Corinth. Right? This is where the play takes place in Corinth. Now, Corinth is a city um, uh, uh, in that little tiny isthmus, right, between since larger Greece and the Peloponnese, right, that big, huge peninsula down at the bottom. Well, that's where Sparta was, right? Um, so that's where we are. Um, and so the guy who wrote this, right, Euripides, 480 to 406 BCE, he's one of three ancient Greek tragedians for whom any plays survived at all. Right, the others, Aeschylus and Sophocles. More of Euripides' plays have survived than the other two put together. Um, he's he's thought of Euripides as he identified with portraying traditional mythical heroes as ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, right? We look at this play and sure, Jason and Medea and Creon, Glauca, all these characters in the play, they are a little bit lofty, but you can really tell that Euripides tried to make them um, grounded in a way, right? We feel like we can identify with them, what they're going through, and what their motivations are. He competed for 40 years in the Dionysian dramatic festivals. He's the youngest, right, of the three, and he died a recluse in relative kind of obscurity because that's what happens. That's Euripides, and I like his beard. So the play itself was first produced in 431 BCE, came in third place, so it got the bronze medal at the Dionysian Dramatic Festival. Now, this is the only one of the Greek tragedies that a kin killer survives unpunished to the end of the play, right? So, in the play itself, right, the two most dramatic, right, people that Medea offs is her own children, right, and she is unpunished at the end of the play. Now, this kind of runs counter, right, to what Aristotle wanted, right? Aristotle wanted people in the tragedies. He thought that it would be best that they act with a sense of decorum, right, and about how people should act. Medea absolutely does not do that, right? She kills her own children. But she's one of our first truly three-dimensional tragic characters, right? Um, and I think that the fact that the chorus is a whole bunch of it's the women of Corinth, right, is the chorus, right? And so automatically at the very beginning of the play, right, you get this what was uncommon for the time, right? This kind of peek inside kind of what was kind of a constructed woman's world, right? Medea talking to other women and talking to her back and this kind of thing, which again was uncommon at the time. So looking at the play through the lens of Aristotle, right? Now, Aristotle definitely knew about Euripides. And Aristotle decided to, no, I think Sophocles' Oedipus Rex is the best example. And so we're not going to necessarily look at how Medea falls into Aristotle, but whether and what kind of push and pull between this particular plot and character and thought and Aristotle, how that tension exists. So does this follow Aristotelian plot structure? Maybe. There does certainly to be there is certainly one action, right? It is the story of why Medea kills her children, you could argue, and how. Now, when we talked about Aristotelian plot structure, we talked about recognition. Um, who has the moment of recognition in this play? I would argue it's not Medea, right? Throughout the play, she knows what she's going to do, right? And there's never a moment where she's just all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I did not know this before. This changes my whole trajectory. She starts the play, um, you know, pissed off at her husband and so pissed off that she's going to kill her children. And that's how she ends the play. However, Jason does have this moment of recognition, right? He goes through a lot of the play thinking that Medea wouldn't do it, that he can convince her otherwise. And then all of a sudden he comes out and it's, oh my gosh, this person that I married, ugh, I never thought that she would do that to me and to our kids, but she did. So who do we feel pity and fear for? Right? Who do we identify with? Um, and is that different then versus now? Right? Um, and the ending, does it follow from the rest of the plot, right? This fantastical ending that happens, right? The supernatural element, is it either probable or necessary? Aristotle thought that everything should be probable or necessary. Um, you know, necessary, is it probable? Would that kind of thing happen in real life? No, not really. Um, but is it necessary to the plot that it does happen? Perhaps. Now, one of the reasons why I'm being a little bit coy is because you do have a quiz, and some of these questions are on the quiz. So do the quiz too. Character. Is Medea sympathetic? Right? Um, do we kind of see ourselves in her? And is it different, right? Depending on, certainly gender has a lot to do with the thought of this play. But does that matter, whether or not you feel for this character or not? Um, she spends a lot of time at the very beginning of the play talking to the women of Corinth about essentially how difficult it is to be a woman in the ancient world. Is Jason sympathetic? He's the person who ends up having the scene of suffering at the end. You know, when Medea is leaving. Um, is he sympathetic though? Do we identify with him? Are these characters heightened? Are they true to life? Can it be kind of both? One thing that I wanted to ask is whose tragedy is it, actually? I could make an argument, and again, this is not, that Euripides didn't write kind of a Cliff's Notes, kind of a book report like, hey, by the way, this is who the main character is. This is who the tragedy is. He didn't do that because it's just a play. But in terms of analysis, whose tragedy is it? I would make an argument that it's Jason's tragedy, even though it's Medea's play, of course, I'd say it's Jason's tragedy. Whereas the tragic flaw. And if I'm thinking about that, right, the tragic flaw in Jason might be his overconfidence, right? He thinks he's able to convince anybody that he's right, right? He never thinks, he always thinks people will go along with him, right? And if you think about it, in the myth of Jason and the Argonauts, he convinced the king to let King Aeetes to give him a chance. He convinced Medea to go along with him. He's convinced everyone, even in Corinth, right? He's convinced Creon that he should marry Glauca. And he goes to Medea and says, hey, I'm going to convince you that me marrying someone else is a good idea. And he thinks it's going to work, but it doesn't, right? And so again, who do you feel most sympathy for? And who does the chorus speak for, right? When we think about Greek choruses, they don't just represent, a bunch of people, right? They could represent some sort of moral center of the community, some kind of conscience, perhaps for the main character, some sort of vocalization of what is right and wrong for, the gods above. Who knows? But in this case, who does the chorus speak for? This chorus of Corinthian women. Now, looking at thought, right? Her first long monologue about marriage and how she would rather go out on a battlefield than go through childbirth, right? What does that say about her and about marriage? The first choral ode, right? What does it say about the status of women? Does it matter the reason why Jason is engaged to Glauca? Right? Does it matter really? He thinks it does, of course, because he spends a lot of time trying to convince Medea that it's a good idea. But why? Um, there's, and this kind of the thought of this play builds onto like, is it better to ask forgiveness than permission? I don't know. The play makes a lot about how Medea is much worse off because she has no home to go home to, right? Now, why does that seem to matter, right? We saw, they would know, the people who saw this play would know that Medea burned her bridges. Like she really cannot go home, right? Um, but why does that seem to matter in terms of this play? What role does forgiveness play in this play? And how does that relate to real life? What is forgiveness? Now, at the very end, Helios, right, a titan, right, like a sun god titan, saves Medea. What does Euripides say about the Greek pantheon, right? And Helios is supposed to be Medea's grandfather. Should Jason have seen this coming? I don't know. Maybe that's his tragic flaw. Um, when we talked about Sophocles, the other playwright, uh, uh, made fate something very important in his plays. How much importance does Euripides give fate in this play? When we're thinking about Medea, is she a witch? You know, uh, a lot of people think of her as an enchantress. Does that make her a witch? I know that's kind of it's not a term that they would necessarily have in ancient Greece, but to us in modern day retelling. Now, and this is kind of putting the thumb on the scales a little bit, right? But so she is a legal resident alien, and she's being deported along with her kids who have known no other home because the government has changed its priorities. Right? That is something that Creon is deciding to do, right? To Medea, right? Got to kick her out, kick her kids out, so that Jason and his new wife Glauca, their kids will have, no rivals, as it were. So, what role does Creon play in this? Essentially, the governmental structure, the powers that be. What role does he have? Some people have argued that Euripides is what today we would consider to be kind of more of a feminist writer, right? Um, for looking at um, the role of women in society with kind of a critical eye and saying, hey, maybe it's not really the best, this role that they have. Um, and so that would argue that he is what today we would consider to be more feminist, right? Um, challenging the status quo. However, right, the main female character, none of the women in this play are good, right? Medea, kills her children and gets away scot-free, and we kind of aren't really happy about that. And um, Glauca is kind of just going along with, okay, sure, I'll marry this hero, right? I know he's married, but whatever. What does it say about Euripides' views on women, and by implication, what are his views on men as well? So those are a whole bunch of questions and things to think about, and things that we will talk further about um, uh, uh, in other plays that we discuss in another sections. So thank you very much. Go do the quiz. It is due by tomorrow, Wednesday, the 8th of September at midnight. And next, we're going to be going from Greece to Rome and see what the Romans do as inheritors of ancient Greek theater. Thank you all very much. Have a nice one.